Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Two Trees Podcast. I'm John Dillon, and I'm here with Kristen Listener.
Hey, y'all.
And Rose Moeller.
Hi, everybody.
These are two of my favorite people.
Aww.
And it's true. It's
I feel
true.
a little honored.
Well, a little honored is acceptable. I mean, don't feel great, but...
A lot honored would be bad.
No, that'd be fine. I just think you're leading a little into being on my favorite list. It is an extensive list.
Oh, I thought it was really short.
No,
so
it is
that's
very
why
short.
the honor's gone.
One of the cool things about being in ministry is I get to run into really great people. And you guys have been a blessing to me over, I don't know how long we've been doing it, but myself and my friend Jonah and Kristen and Rose have been gathering together every week to read C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. I think it's been about a year.
Mm-hmm.
Has it been?
About a year.
We were together, I think, a year before we adopted Kristen into
So,
Look at that.
This is
the cult.
yeah. It wasn't intentional. I didn't realize how cool you were. To me, I know you were just Martin's wife.
Look
and
at
then
me.
I know, right? And now we're buddies. But we were reading through the Ransom trilogy, and John and Jonah and I had done Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra, and then Kristen joined us for that Hideous Strength.
Yes.
Which honestly, I felt like major props for her because she crash coursed through the first two in order to catch up on the third one, which is
Weird.
super weird. Yeah.
I did a lot of Google search.
Yeah.
I think,
Does that? Why is this bear
yeah, I know.
important?
Who is this person?
And
Yeah.
where
there's a
did
lot of that.
Merlin come from and what is he doing in England again? It was a lot. But anyway.
It
Yeah.
was.
So for me, reading books is like talking to people. A book is a voice trapped on paper.
Sure.
You know, these are the thoughts of somebody, and they're sharing their ideas with me. And so I've always loved reading. And C.S. Lewis has really done more for my faith than any other Christian, with the exception of my mom and dad.
Wow.
I have really been blessed by his books. And for a long time, I thought he just wrote children's fiction, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe kind of a thing.
Right.
And I remember the first time someone gave me a book and they were like, this is written by C.S. Lewis. And I was expecting Aslan, and I got Apologetics. And I was like, what is this?
Do you remember about how old you were?
I was in college.
Okay, so you were an
Yeah.
adult, like a young adult, but you would have been an adult.
Yeah, so the college that I went to was very strict, fundamental college, and very picky about right answers versus heresy. And there wasn't really a lot of room for even conversation about differing opinions. And so coming across C.S. Lewis, this guy's an Anglican, he smokes a pipe, he's a big drinker, he's having theological conversations in the pub with his buddies. I wasn't at all sure what to do with this book, except that I was really drawn to the picture of Jesus that he presented in the pages.
Did you feel torn a little bit? I mean, reading about somebody doing this and having your background, there was like a little bit of like uncertainty. How can you even do that, right? Be in a pub, talk about
Like
Jesus.
this
those
guy
kinds of
is
things.
really bad, but he's really good.
Right.
What do
Yeah, I
do?
was
I mean,
amazed. He was so gracious. People would obviously disagree with him. I've read everything that I've ever found that C.S. Lewis has written.
Oh, wow, okay.
And I love him. And he's been a constant friend in my head as I've read his books through the years. But when people disagreed with him, instead of getting angry or calling names, he would always say things like, that is a wonderful point. Let me think about it. And he would give compliments to people, and then he would present an idea. And what I pulled away from was that this was a man who just was genuinely interested in having a conversation about topics that fascinated him. And I wanted that to be part of my life as well. It doesn't mean I don't have opinions and I don't have things that I'm convinced about. But instead of viewing people as a threat, they became friends to talk with and to have deep thoughts and ideas, not something to be afraid of. I mean, it was always like, we don't talk about politics or religion. And I don't care much about politics, but I'm super into religion. And I want to talk about all these different ideas and devil's advocate sometimes and just talk about it. You know, this is something fascinating. And the more I read him, the more I was just blessed by what he had to say, his pursuit of joy, his discussion of things that just made his life better resonated deep inside of me. And I don't agree with everything that he says, but what C.S. Lewis has done for me is shown me a godly way to love Jesus and people at the same time and still talk about heavy subjects.
Sure.
So when I was younger, this, as all good quotes happen, I had a Chinese fortune cookie.
Rose is old now, so she has to
am.
preface her stories
I do.
with...
Back when I was young. Anyway, it said, if you and I agree all the time, one of us is unnecessary. And it made an impact on me because I know, right?
C.S.
Who
Lewis
knew?
didn't say that.
I
but-
didn't say
Yeah.
he did. I did say Chinese fortune cookie. But the point is that made an impact on me that took years to catch up to my, maturity. And because to me, the important part of a conversation was to win it. And in my immaturity,
Sure.
was like, I got to win this conversation. And you just beat people over the head with like pseudo intellect and like quotes and, logic until they basically are like, wow, you're amazing. So what John's saying actually it really rings true also because Lewis is so gifted at having a conversation, which is not the same thing as winning a conversation. And I really loved his group of friends that he was with, the Inklings. And there's another book that he didn't write because it's about him. It's called Bandersnatch.
Oh,
have
super
you,
good
Have you read
book.
it? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good.
Okay.
And in there, at one point, I remember this thing saying that they had all learned to disagree like gentlemen. It doesn't mean there wasn't heated discussions or opinions being thrown around, but to me, that is what happens when you are in community with someone and you care about them and you care more about the conversation, whether it's about the Lord or whether it's about really any topic, is to actually have a conversation, not win a conversation. And I feel like Lewis has shown me through his books how to do that. That's been a big takeaway for me. What about you, Kristen?
Yeah, so I want to back up because I think as a younger child, and most people have heard about C.S. Lewis, but I think the younger years start somewhere around Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia, right? That's where the stories begin, and it's when you start maturing that you realize that C.S. Lewis has such a deeper meaning, not only behind those books, but all of his other books, fiction, nonfiction. And so I knew him then, but didn't appreciate it until I was a senior in high school, and I was a helper in my math class, and the teacher gave me Mere Christianity, a hard book back for a graduation gift. And that sat on the shelf embarrassingly for a few years. It wasn't until a few years later that I picked it up and read it and realized that C.S. Lewis was far, far more deeper than what I had imagined.
The cool thing about, I think, the Chronicles of Narnia isn't just the fascinating world building and storytelling that he has, but it's that as a grown-up reader interested in philosophy and apologetics and much bigger concepts than just do the good guys win, those books hold up and they continue to have layers and levels of philosophy and deep questions that are engaged in, even in this little children's book. It's not a
Sure.
giant book, but even as a grown-up in my 40s, I'm blessed by it.
I think that is sort of the underlying magic of Narnia, pun intended, is that it does continue, sort of like the books themselves, where it says, come further in, come higher up. It's that's what they do to you. Like as because I read them too as a child. I'm going to say I was around 10 when I first read it. And strangely, like someone gave me The Last Battle, and I read that one first. And I
Did
was
you
like,
really?
I know, right? And actually, side note, I kept the copy and I still have it. And that's been, many years ago. And I still have it. And every once in a while I look at it and I think I should probably find her and give this back. But then I don't because it just means so much to me because it's the first one I've ever read. So then I asked
Are
my
you telling
mom.
us you stole a book?
I never gave it back. Is that the same thing?
Ooh.
Aren't you on the library board?
I have a very sad and sorry history with books. Never loan me a book. I'll either destroy it or never give it back. But
Note to
they're
self.
both like duly noted. No, but the point is I asked my mom at that point, I was like, have you ever read this? And my mom, who has read everything in the world, was like, oh yeah. She's like, that's not the first one you need to start with. She's like, well, you should start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. She's like, it's not the first one in the series chronologically, but okay, whatever. So I went ahead and read it and fell in love with Narnia. And like John just said, even in my 40s, I have found something will happen to me and I'm like, this is what he was trying to say. You know, there's this one scene and it's in Prince Caspian where they come back to Narnia and they find that the geography has changed. Like they thought they knew how to get to this place. They're sort of lost in the woods. Well, Aslan appears and shows Lucy a trail to take, but nobody else can see him. And she insists that they go. And they talk her out of it because she's the baby, you know, the youngest of the family. And they're like, we're not doing it. So they go a different way and it doesn't work out. And so they end up going her way that she said that Aslan has shown her. And Susan is balking, stumbling, complaining, and like doesn't want to do it. And Peter turns to her and he says, this is so easy. Even a baby could do it, you know? And it's just another way of saying, unless you become like a child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. It takes faith to do something that you can't see. Just a simple story in a Narnia, you know, book. But I've thought about that many times when I overcomplicate things or I don't want to take the step forward or I think I know a better way. I'm like, I'm basically being Susan, you know?
Yeah.
Little things like that come out constantly out of his Narnia books for me.
And do you feel like each time you read it, there's more and more that surfaces?
Every time, and I mean that. Kip and I, our youngest Kip, we listen to him every summer. During the school year, we have other commitments. We have other literature to get through. But during the summer, it's our listening series for the year. And this past year, we started it in, I don't know, May or June. And Kip is turning 13. And I was like, this is probably going to be one of the last times I listen to it with one of my kids. I've been listening to this thing for like, like probably 15 years since Sydney was little.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so I've had quite a few runs with it, and I adore the series, and I do learn something almost every time we repeat them. I learn new things.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time reading as a pastor. That's one of the major parts of my job is I'm researching for the podcast. I'm reading academic books or I'm digging into theology books. And I'm going to tell you, the books of C.S. Lewis, whether they're the fiction books like the Deeper Heaven books or they're the Chronicles of Narnia, they're stacked with stuff that will make you just stop and think. And reading Lewis is about more than just pushing through the story. It's about engaging in the conversation that he's trying to start with these topics. And so when we gather, we typically go to a place called Glacier View Coffee Shop.
Shout out.
Shout out to our friends
If you're ever
there.
in Covington, Ohio, please stop in.
Yeah, it's really good, and they're nice. But we gather up, and we are right now reading Letters to Malcolm.
Chiefly on prayer.
Chiefly on prayer, which may be my favorite. I really like Letters to
John
Malcolm.
loves chapter 5. He
It
had a heart
changed the
moment.
way I look at prayer.
Yeah.
It was such an eye-opening and life-extending, deepening moment for me when I read this book. And he's talking about how to use the Lord's Prayer and not just say the Lord's Prayer. It's a really fascinating read. But I love that this conversation that he started ages ago by thinking and talking through these ideas has enabled us as friends to sit down and join in that conversation.
And very rarely do we get through a sentence through a book and there isn't something deeper there. I feel like every time we read another sentence in the book, it's just like there's so much packed into each chapter, each time. And it's just wild that you can relate back to Scripture with it.
Yeah, I'm sure that one of the best things you can do as far as Bible study goes is read the Bible in community. It's to have friends that you're reading with. It holds you accountable. It also allows you to talk about it. And so whether you're taking a podcast like The Two Trees or the Naked Bible or the Bible Project or whatever it may be, having people who will walk through it with you will tremendously increase what you get out of it. And you're going to add things to the conversation that didn't come up in the book or in the podcast. Sometimes our conversations are, this makes me think about this event, something I saw on TV or a movie I watched or my kid or any number of things. But it moves it from a passive to an active thing when you are in community. And it just is, to me, such a rich part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus and to have family around them.
I think too that, and this is for all books, I mean, not terribly written and boring books, but for well-written books and for scripture, one thing that constantly surprises me is the diverse group that it can bring together. Like Kristen and I and you and Jonah, and I wish he was here because he'd probably have plenty to say. There's nothing really that would have drawn the four of us together like a book, you know? I mean, I know the Lord can work in many other ways, but he chose to work through the canon of C.S. Lewis to bring us together.
Right.
And each of us has said separately how much we love his books, whether we've read all of them, like super nerd over here, or whether we've dabbled, or whether we're working
Is
through
that me?
them.
Am I super
You're
nerd?
super nerd.
Okay.
I know. I cut my eyes in your direction. So, plus, like, it's pretty self-evident. I mean,
I'm a little nerdy.
yeah, and you've read all his
it's
works.
okay.
So, anyway,
I am a blessing.
you are full of a surprising amount of knowledge, and I salute you. I do. But anyway,
Second place at the last trivia night at Buffalo Wild Wings.
almost
We were
beat
so
that
there.
other
Wound
table.
reopened.
Yes.
We have been losing consistently to a team called the Homeschool Valedictorians for a very long time.
2 years. For 2 years, guys.
They
Apparently,
are
we're still
really
holding on to
good.
it, though, in case
I
you're
mean-
wondering.
Yes, I forgive them for their awesomeness.
I'm going to bring this back to my point, which is that literature and books in general can bring a diverse group of people together and give them something in common. And I really am thankful that I have you guys to read him with. And not only that, but I don't think I would have made it through that hideous strength without you guys.
It's such a good
I definitely
book.
wouldn't have.
Oh,
I was so
man.
fresh into
It's got
C.S. Lewis.
Merlin.
Yeah.
It's got, it's so good.
it's just.
And divine counsel stuff all over it.
Yeah, and I would
Yeah.
have known how to unpack his writing like that without gathering. I think. I mean, I would have read it, and I think I would have grasped maybe a few things that I saw that would relate me back to the Bible, but I would not have unpacked it in depth like we did when we sat down and kind of really went chapter by chapter.
Yeah, I think one of the powerful things about gathering together to talk about a podcast or a scripture or even a book is for me, I'm an introvert and I struggle really bad with social cues and small talk. I'm just bad at it.
When someone calls you super nerd, you don't even recognize it. You're so introverted.
I'm just weird. I can't help it. But I know that about me. And so coming in and saying, okay, we're going to be talking about these ideas. That has opened up doors for me to build relationships and get to know people because they're not telling me how's the weather or how's your favorite sports ball team doing.
Go sports team.
I get to actually know, oh, this part offended you. Well, how come? Or you didn't agree with this. Why? And so it isn't really about do you agree with me as much as using it to spur on conversation. I think you said it earlier. It's not about winning a conversation. You don't really win conversations, but you do win arguments. You want to not have arguments as much. I want to have conversations with people.
Because those stay open. Arguments close. They close off relationships. They close off the topic. They close everything, and it causes nothing but problems and bad feelings. But conversations are ongoing. You can drop it, and then you can pick it back up later. Or something that happens reminds you of it, and then it's alive again. And you're like, oh, I have
Yeah.
to tell her about that. Or
Sure.
I
And
need
you
to
can
let them know.
make an argument for something, but unless it has this overarching conversation, it's just people online typing at each other or quotes yelling back and forth,
Sure.
or slogans and that kind of a thing.
Memes.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I think of an argument more of like less open-minded, and a conversation is open-minded. I'm here to kind of open my mind to a different thought or thinking about this differently, versus an argument feels a little bit more targeted. Another word for it, I guess.
Yeah, one of my favorite Bible studies that I get to teach, I teach on Tuesdays. There's a group, there's all kinds of people from all over the place. And again, they would never all be together unless this restaurant had opened its doors and let us come in before they open up just to have this Bible study. But reading the scripture in community and seeing the questions that they have always surprises me. Because I'm like, never thought to answer that question, or I didn't see that, but I can understand where you're coming from. And it's enriched my reading of whatever book we're doing so much so because there are so many different points of view around the table.
So do you find it important to read books like this to help along with your faith, or is this something that hinders faith because it stops you from going back?
To me, reading C.S. Lewis is just as important as sitting down with some other godly person and talking.
Sure.
I'm not taking C.S. Lewis and saying, teach me what the Bible
Yeah,
means.
absolutely.
I'm talking with somebody, or he's talking to me, and I'm thinking about what he's saying. And so I hear people say all the time things like, I don't need any books but the Bible. And okay, I mean, that sounds really nice, except what you're saying is, I don't need any people in my life.
Yeah.
I don't listen to anyone. No one can tell me what to think or how to think. I am wise enough on my own.
Yeah.
And you're not alone. There's 2,000 plus years of phenomenal Christian men and women who've been thinking and writing and talking. It's, I think, foolish to cut yourself off from the conversations of the past.
So, Chris, sorry, go ahead.
And of the present, to get together with people who are still thinking and doing these things.
I was going to ask you, Kristen, so what are your thoughts on C.S. Lewis and going deeper into Scripture? Or do you think it hinders you from going into Scripture when you read somebody else's thoughts on a Scripture? You're like, well, now I know everything I need to know.
Close the book. I'm done.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and the Bible. Is that true for you, or do you think that this enhances?
I think it's made me more hungry. I think
Okay.
what I do is we get in these deep discussions like we have, and then it's like, okay, no, where's that at in the Bible? I really need to go back and re-look that up and reread that and figure out why. And so, to me, at least, opening C.S. Lewis has kind of provoked more spiritually for me than hinder me. What about you?
Well, I think that that's true because in the least creepy way possible, it feels like there's a fifth person at our table when we're talking. Like he is part of the conversation because we read his words, we talk about them, and then we go back and look and to quote things.
Right.
And as we're doing that, sometimes somebody will say, wait a minute, this is like that scripture. And there's like this aha moment around the table, you know? And so it's not that we venerate him or, you know, hold him as equal at all. But like you said, it enhances and it brings us deeper into a conversation. There's, besides that, he has an incredible amount of common sense, which I really highly prize. It's not just a bunch of mumbo jumbo or whatever. Like when he's talking, you're like, that's happened to me, or I know what you're saying, that resonates, you know, over and over. He's very, very skilled at presenting a thought that you can relate to. And that holds true in almost all of his books that I've read.
Now, he has different styles of writing, though, if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, I know some of it's allegory, right, where you're...
So C.S. Lewis wanted to be a poet.
Okay.
When you go back, this is a man who lived through the First World War, had a very rough time of it, and then, you know, his life is academic, but he's treated very badly in the academic world, and he kind of lives a hard life when you read what he accomplishes and does in his relationships with other people. And so we kind of treat him almost as this modern-day saint kind of a thing, but he was a regular human being, and he wanted to be a poet. He loved literature, and his job was books. That's what he did. He had read almost everything that there was to read in his field, and was a very intelligent person. And when you read his books, you're not just engaging with his thoughts, but his thoughts about lots of other people's thoughts. And so it's almost like a small encyclopedia sometimes. And so, yeah, he definitely is, he just has made my life brighter.
That's awesome.
If that makes sense. And reading him with you guys has made my life brighter. Like right now we're talking about prayer. Letters to Malcolm is a really cool book. And it's not a real long book. It's the kind of I think we're going to finish it up in a couple weeks.
Probably.
And we take our sweet time moving through it. And we definitely don't cover everything in it because the goal of this isn't to understand as much as to participate in a conversation.
Sure.
And so sometimes on our podcast, Jacob will bring up, you know, go out to eat, talk about the podcast, listen to a podcast and discuss it with each other. And really what we're hoping is happening is this. I know that you guys are super smart people, or else you wouldn't be listening to our podcast because you are the cream of the crop. But there's so many wonderful things and places and voices out there that to view us as in competition with each other is to misunderstand the nature of what church is. We're a body, we're a family, we're one people. And so we're not trying to tell you what you have to think, as much as just trying to add to this conversation and to encourage people, whether it's online or it's in person, gather together with other people and read together.
Yeah.
So, Kristen, which of Lewis's books have you read? And if you don't have a comprehensive list, that's fine. But which one stands out to you the most? I hesitate to say the word favorite because I always feel so much pressure when someone says, "What's your favorite book?"
You may
or
select one book
"What's your
Only
favorite
on a
song?"
desert island
Yeah,
Only
right.
one.
for the
yeah.
rest of your life.
And that's probably not going to happen to most of us. So, which one stands out? I guess
I feel like
should
my
say.
list of what I've read is so limited. It's so small. So I haven't really read as many as John. So I'm the one that's dabbling, right? I'm the one that's just starting in this. But so far, the book that stood out the most is Till We Have Faces. There was something about the veiling and Orwell that just I still think about, and that's been probably 3-4 months ago that we read that book and finished it.
So most people are probably not familiar with Till We Have Faces.
Okay.
I think it's probably his best written book.
Okay.
And
You mean
it-
like from a literary perspective?
from a literary perspective, and I think
Okay.
you can thank his wife, Joy Davidman, for part of that as
Okay.
well. But what about that book? Give us the broadness. What's the book about, and why did you like it?
Oh man,
This is not a
knew
small
it.
task.
I knew it.
Please give us a small lecture.
Oh, everybody
on-
buckle up. This could get pretty bumpy.
Excellent.
It's a lot about. No, you can get to the back of the book, and it'll tell you a little bit about the myth that he bases the book on. But it's a sister that wants to possess the love of her other sister. And it's just so toxic of the different loves, and we find that out throughout the book. But I think what holds most true in my heart that I have followed is the upside down theory of where they live and going up the mountain to where her sister is. That there's just that picture that when I read that just forms in my mind, and I think about that going up to God and going up to the kingdom and where she resides and where she is happy and glowing and where she can't obtain because she won't let go of herself.
Now, C.S. Lewis pulls that not just out of the myths of the ancient world, but out of the Bible. This is part of the ancient world, this concept of going up the mountain
Right.
to meet God. And so there's this rich imagery that I think reading it in Lewis brings this ancient concept alive in the books. They're not something to be afraid of. They're something to be enjoyed. I think it's the most beautiful of his books.
Yeah.
I think too that it's funny how we can read the same book and have different takeaways, which is
Sure.
great. Like that's where we learn from each other. Because next time I run into that, I'll be like, "This is what Kristen was talking about." And I think for me in that book is which this is essentially what the book is. The entire book is her complaint against the God. She tells her story through a litany and like a written down, account of her complaint against the gods. And what she says to them is, you bait us into doing something without making it clear what we're to do. And then when we choose wrong, you punish us, And then she says, and she's bringing this railing against them, like in a dream vision she has in a courtroom. And at the end of it, she realizes she's just saying the same thing over and over. And they say, "Are you answered?" And she says, "I am." And she says that the writing itself was the answer, like just to bring it to them in the conversation. And there's this whole sub, chapter going on of veiling herself from the world and from them. And she takes her veil off when she makes her appearance. I think that in my life, that's a lot of times I have my complaint against God, and I find myself now, I'll be like, "You're just bringing a complaint against God. Where are you? What are you doing? And when I'm talking to him about it, I realize that the unveiling is not that he was veiled from me, but that I was veiled from him. And in the prayer is where the unveiling happens.
Right.
It's bringing the complaint, and then you are answered just in the conversation even, I don't know. And again, that might be my own interpretation of it, but that's what I love about books. And that's what I love about Lewis is that
That was a fantastic wrap up of the book. That
You're
was
welcome.
awesome. Yeah.
Well, in Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, it talks about an unveiling, and we
It
all
does,
went,
Oh my gosh, where was this when we were reading
right. This
it?
is the whole book in 2 sentences.
right.
And that's what I love about like listening to the books talk to each other too.
Rose, do you have a favorite book of C.S. Lewis?
I would probably agree that Till We Have Faces is a favorite of mine. It really stands out because I can relate to Orwell, the main character. I don't know how you could read it and not relate to her, but that just might be my depravity.
Also, it has given us a rich treasury of insults to yell at each other.
Yes. And if you read, we will not air those, but if you read it, you'll find them right away.
And you'll giggle.
Yes, you
Like
will.
we did.
Yeah. And I think that the first time I read that, I did cry because I was like, I am Ungit. You know, she's this terrible goddess in the book who is what Orwell realizes that she is. And everything that is anti-God and redemption can be in each of us. And I think that that's
Right.
why that book is such a standout, because even though it's told in this fantastical like myth manner and like ancient world perspective, it's so relevant when
Right.
when it's been unlocked by your own experiences. And I would say another one is and this is I love The Abolition of Man, the men without chest, the head, the chest, and the belly.
That one's a hard one to read for a lot of people.
It is, but it's short. So if you want to give it a try, and then wait some time and read it again. I wouldn't say I've nailed it, but I've thought about the men without chest many times, like the where the seat of the emotions is and where your head knowledge is and where your heart is. It's great, but it's kind of a lot. I agree. I don't know. And I mean, golly, Narnia, like always.
Yeah.
It's just the best. I can't say enough good
Right.
about Narnia, but that I always feel like that goes without saying. It's like saying
Yeah.
you love Jesus the most and then everybody else,
But I do love
So.
Jesus the most.
I know.
I think mine is, I love Letters to Malcolm.
Okay.
It really is one of the books that has had just a profound change on a very practical and deep part of my life. I enjoyed it immensely. If you're looking for, like, I know a lot of our listeners have talked to me and said, they really struggle reading bigger, longer books. If that's the case, there's a book called God in the Dock, which is
yeah.
a bunch of articles that C.S. Lewis wrote. And so every chapter is kind of a different discussion on a different idea. And so
Okay.
really you're just looking at like 10 pages maybe as he's dealing with, some of them are really short. They're like a page and a half. And so rather...
So you could break it down. You could break it down without losing.
I plan to make you guys read it next after we do this one.
I thought we were going through the entire canon until we're old and gray. So
I am
whatever.
old and gray.
Bring it
That's
on.
true. We are old and gray. Kristen has yet to catch up.
Wait a minute. I'm getting grouped in here.
Yeah.
Well, you're in. No, but I think how important is it, and it doesn't have to be C.S. Lewis for you. I don't know
Right.
what books you're loving and reading, but come together with your people
Sure.
with more than just shallow, hey, how are you kind of stuff, and be the kind of person that can have a conversation and not just an argument. I really look forward to gathering at the coffee shop and just hearing what you guys thought about the chapter. And sometimes I'm super offended because you didn't like something that I thought was beautiful, or vice versa. Or you'll say, this is obviously what he means. And I'm like, no, that is not at all what
I
he
didn't
means.
see that at all.
I don't think so.
John literally shut his book last time and did a mic drop with it after he read a quote. And we're all like, that was cool.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean,
Oh, so good. It resonated down in my soul. Don't view books as work. They're a conversation. You're talking with someone, or they're speaking to you.
Yeah.
And it should be guiding your thoughts. And there is so much beautiful literature out there, whether it's C.S. Lewis, and a lot of times, you don't even have to necessarily be reading a religious book. The building of friendships is an important part of discipleship.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It isn't just, hey, I'm going to tell you something, take notes, and then go live this out. I don't think anyone should do that unless they know that you're worth listening to, that there's a trust factor that grows. And the friendships that have grown as I've got to know your ideas and your thoughts and Jonah's has made my life better. And I've learned so much, not just from Lewis, but from you guys as well.
Yeah.
I think, too, that in the 2024 year that we live in, podcasts are another way to connect, too,
Right.
because there's so many of them, not to put, a shout out to the two trees, but we talk about reading books together. And specifically, we decided to nerd out and do a C.S. Lewis, recording here. But as John said, it can be other books, too, and that's fine. Or you can find a good podcast that is thought-provoking and text it to a friend. Say, hey, listen to this. My friends and I do this a lot. We'll be like, hey, listen to this. I want to hear your thoughts on it, you know. Or this reminds me of something you were telling me about. What do you think, And then we'll either vox back and forth or try to meet up and chat or whatever. And I just think that the like the marketplace of good ideas and good literature. It produces good conversation, which in turn like ties you closer together, which is community. And that's what being a Christian, that's part of being a Christian, is finding people of your faith and your beliefs and reaching out to other ones, reaching out to those people that you're wanting to draw to the Lord, and it's just such a blessing if there's ever been a redeeming use of technology.
Yeah, sure.
These are some of the things, these are some of the ways to do it,
Anytime we're diving in deeper together is growth. And I think anywhere you can show that or do that with somebody is very important. It doesn't have to look linear or the same or parallel to anybody else. But growing in deeper is just so important to the faith walk.
When we started the podcast, I don't know if we've ever shared this story, but I was trying to write a book about how, as a pastor, to help people understand the ancient worldview and how the way they talk about odd things like Leviathan being chaos and going up and down the mountain. And I took the first couple chapters, we went salmon fishing up in Michigan, and Jacob Kessling and Nick Church were there, and I read them the first chapter, and they looked at me and they were like, so what? And they were like, if you put this book out there, who's going to read it? And what are you talking about? And I was like, you know what? You're right. I don't know that this is a good venue for me to reach out in. And so we thought perhaps a podcast might give us a better way of having the conversation. And then our friend Carrie Griffel started a whole podcast called Answers in Genesis. And we were like, all right, the Genesis thing is covered. We can move out and talk about other things. And it's really just grown from there. But the whole purpose was to try to facilitate discussions.
Can I just say something real quick? Isn't her podcast called Genesis Marks the Spot?
What did I say?
Answers in Genesis.
Oh, that's the other guy.
Just in case somebody actually goes and looks for it.
No.
I feel like
Answers in Genesis is the guy who's with the ark, which is not far from us.
You're right.
Sorry, Carrie. She would be
I wondered
mortified.
if she'd be coming out of her chair right now.
Oh, she totally is.
Right. Okay.
Genesis Marks the Spot.
Okay.
Way more Carrie Griffel related content on that side. But it's not about, like, in my mind, like, I'm from West Virginia. I don't have degrees upon degrees upon degrees, and I've never been a student at Oxford or anything like that. But I love the Bible, and I love talking about these things. And to me, I'm trying to leave something that helps people read their Bible. I don't really care if people agree with my take. I'm interested in starting the conversation and get people to think. If you like that idea, that's cool. If you think John is nuts and I'm going to prove him wrong, and you dig into your Bible, I'm just as happy with that, to be quite honest with you. I just want to spur this on. And so I cannot tell you how important it is to have your people with you. Some of you guys are living in places where you don't have a group of people to gather with, or you don't know, or the people that you are gathering with don't like the same kind of things that you do. And so I would encourage you to pray, ask God to bring those people into your life, whether it's online or it's in person. I think that God can open those doors and bring them to you. But when it happens, don't try to make little versions of you. Don't be so focused on maintaining power and control over your crew.
If both of us agree all the time, one of us is unnecessary. Don't try to make everybody be just like you. Embrace each other's differences, for real. I think that's really important, One thing that I've learned from being with Jonah, which has been really fun, is seeing an insight into in John 2, but is watching them pastor,
Yeah.
They pastor, and they pastor hard. And it's really neat to see an insight into a life that I've never lived and I'm never going to,
and not having a spouse do it. Right?
Yeah. And so, exactly. Jeremy is he's not a pastor. And one time he got mistaken for one because he has a long beard. And I guess pastors have long beards or something.
Is that a thing?
Yeah,
apparently.
Yeah. And he was mostly offended by me laughing so hard at the idea of him being a pastor more than anything. I was like, spit my food out. So, yeah. Anyway, all that to say, it's been neat getting to know another person. And again, how would we have ever got to know Jonah without the medium of a book between us? Yeah. And I love hearing his thoughts. He's a neat guy. And I just think that to know that you have, and that's what I'm saying is if you don't have somebody right now to sit and discuss with, you're like, man, that sounds awesome. But it's, like John said, pray about it, because he will bring the most unlikely people in the most unlikely places,
Sure.
Into your life. But sometimes you have to be the one to reach out, So go hang out at your local library, see what kind of books people
Coffee
are checking
shop.
out. Yeah, right.
We love
Yeah.
coffee.
Look available.
So, in this upcoming season, we're going to be making the jump from the Old Testament into the New Testament, and we're going to be digging into the life of Jesus. And I would encourage you guys to gather your people together, bounce the ideas off of each other. What did you like? What did you think? Do you have a different idea? Talk about those things. Around Easter time, we are going to be releasing a series of lectures intended to have conversation. And I have lined up some really cool speakers who are going to present something about the idea of the Garden of Eden. And I've made them also create a discussion guide and questions and all kinds of really cool things to go. But the whole purpose behind it is for you to listen to something together with your friends and then go talk about it. Not to be passive, but to be active participants in this.
Yeah.
And so we're going to try to do more than just talk the talk here. We're going to try to equip you with the things that you need to do this. And so I would encourage you, start praying about, who could I hang out with about this? Who's just as nerdy about this kind of thing as I am? And whether they agree with you or not isn't the point. The point is to have a peaceful conversation. And the kind of thing where I love them enough to be able to disagree. I love Michael Heiser, his work, The Unseen Realm. The first time I read it, I was furious, and I was like, this is not true at all. And then I didn't know why I thought it was untrue, and so I read it again, and I was convinced he was right. And it really messed me up, and I had to change. And God has brought some just wonderful people into my life to further the discussion. But the thing that I love most about Dr. Heiser was the same thing. Was this desire not to fix my theology, but this desire to talk to me about his and to tell me the way he saw things and to say, hey, if this is true, then this changes things. Think about it, pray about it. And it wasn't about, saying, well, this guy wears my jersey, so I agree with him. And I saw in him one of the things that I loved about C.S. Lewis. And that was just this generous nature and this desire to start a bigger conversation.
So on that note, in the canon of C.S. Lewis, if somebody said, I've always have heard of him, I know a little bit about him, I've always heard he's great, but I don't even know where to start, And if I was going to grab a friend and read a book of his together, which one would you guys recommend? We've said our greatest hit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that'd be somebody else, What do you think would be a good one to begin with?
Yeah, well, I guess it would depend on what you're trying to do. During the Second World War, the BBC contacted C.S. Lewis, and they asked him to produce a series of broadcast talks to talk to the nation about what Christianity is about. And while the war was going on, there was just this angst that was going on. People were afraid. And he gave one of the most robust defenses of Christianity that I think has ever been written. And it was later put into a book called Mere Christianity. And it is a beautifully simple and complicated at the same time view of the faith. And I think it's a great place to start.
I'm going to just say something here. It is simple and it is complicated. And my sister and I have something we call the Lewis zone. You might be reading along, and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, or this is a slog. And
Is that the Lewis zone?
Yeah, no, not there yet. And all of a sudden, something he says snaps into focus, and you're like, wait a minute, and you're like,
now I can trace back this
and
thought.
So you keep reading,
Right.
and you're like underlining everything. And so then if you go back and reread the sloggy bit, you're like,
my gosh, we're building to
it
that.
opens
Yeah,
up.
sure.
So if you start it and you're like, okay, just keep going. Just wait for the magic. Or just, keep reading, get it into your soul, and then maybe come back to it another time. That's what I do
would
with a lot of
wholeheartedly
books.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Read it, think about it, come back, reread it again. Because I think there's times when you're like, I have no idea where he's headed with this thought. I'm not following. All of a sudden you catch that one phrase, right? And going back and rereading, you're like, man, okay, I'm starting to follow this
And
thought.
that's one of the cool things about reading in community
True, yeah.
is that I don't want to look stupid in front of everyone, so I'm going to try. Like normally, if I didn't like a book,
I got to bring something to the book club.
I would just close the book and move on to something else that I want because there's no accountability to push through. Knowing that you guys are there and you're going to have thoughts pushes me. I think it's that iron sharpens iron.
Yeah. Because I feel like I have a lot to live up to with two pastors being and one well-versed woman. And I am
Who's
like,
that?
hilarious.
It's the one sitting next to the super nerd, John.
You're both sitting at the same table as me. Carry on.
But it does. It puts this, I don't want to say it's good pressure, right? Good pressure to really be held accountable for reading it.
It should stay that way. You shouldn't be a bully about these kinds of things. Like, there have been times, like we have one of the members of our group, we won't say who it is, but is famous for almost reading the chapters. And
this person might be sitting in their car waiting.
We love this person. But it's fun,
Finishing.
though. As soon as you make it a chore, you've really killed something beautiful.
Yeah.
Don't try to, you're not a seminary professor.
This isn't a checklist thing.
No.
Well, we'll start out sometimes and be like, I think we can do 3 or 4 chapters. Let's do chapters like 7 through 11. And then when we get there, so-and-so has only read like chapter 7 and 8. That's okay. We just dial it back to 7 and 8. It's a long, term commitment. You don't have to, it's not a race. And other times we'll read 3 or 4 chapters and we'll come and only get one discussed. And then we're like, well, I guess we're set for the next time. It's
and
not.
that's
right.
okay. What book would you recommend? So I would recommend Mere Christianity.
I probably would have said that, but I think that his like the apologetic books are wonderful. I do. I think that if you want to dip your toe in the water of C.S. Lewis, that something like The Great Divorce is a good start.
Oh,
It's told in story form, and so it's easier to read. You're taking in more concepts than you know, more ideas and thoughts than you know as you're reading what's a really great story. It's and same with Till We Have Faces, I would say also. So I would say probably one of those would be a good start. I also love the Screwtape Letters. It's an inversion though, so you have to read it with the thought in mind of who the good guy is and who the bad guys are. But it's so well done. It gives you a glimpse into spiritual warfare that you would not probably reach on your own without reading through that. And I love that. Again, that's not a hard read. It's interesting. The chapters are not long, and it's kind of tongue in cheek. So you're reading along, you're learning along with the character. So
a side story about Screwtape Letters.
Sure.
Did you know he started writing that in church when the pastor lost him in a sermon?
No, I did not.
In the back of my mind, every time I look out on my congregation and I can tell
somebody's writing a Screwtape letter book right
this
now.
Side of the room, and I'm secretly hoping that they're composing something awesome like the Screwtape Letters.
That's a great thought. I love that.
How about you, Kristen? You've not been reading his stuff for too long, but what parts or what book would you recommend?
I think I guess it really depends on what you're aiming for, right? What your stage of life you're in. But I think what's easy to start with, and I mean this most general, is starting with Chronicles of Narnia in those books, because I think it gives you an idea of how to dive in deeper, but still keep it pretty surface and get through the storyline, getting a concept of what it is to go to, like, Till We Have Faces, or going into The Great Divorce and understanding, breaking down characters and how this relates back to Scripture. In my mind, that's where I would probably recommend to start.
And because of if you're a believer and you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's not a very far jump to see what he's doing there with Aslan and Jesus, and the witch and the evil. And same with The Magician's Nephew, the first one. It's not a far jump to see the creation story and the redemption and the beginning of the introduction of sin into the garden. So,
why are you laughing at me?
Because something's tickled your fancy, and when you laugh, we all laugh.
It's okay. Carry on. I'm sorry.
Right. Anyway, all that to say, so it's not that it's so on the nose that it's an eye roll. It's that you're like, oh, I see what you're doing. Well, that leads you into the next story and the next story.
Right.
One of the best ones, I think, there's so many. 2 of my favorites in that series is The Horse and His Boy.
Okay.
Love that. Learn so much from the horses, Bree and Hwin, on what it means to be a believer. If you've read it, you might know what I mean. If you haven't, go read it. And then the other one is The Silver Chair. Okay. It's not my kids' favorite. And so sometimes they're like, can we skip The Silver Chair? And I'm like, no, it's time for The Silver Chair. And I love it so much because of, everything they learn in the underground when they're in the Lady of the Green Kirtle in her room and her deception and stuff. And again, if you've read it, you know, and if you haven't, go read it. Be amazed. Like, he's just such a gifted storyteller. And so I really agree with you. I do think the Chronicles of Narnia would be a wonderful place to start if you haven't already read it.
Just to get an idea.
There's some really great books, but beyond Lewis as well, my friends, you probably have authors that are special to you. They don't even have to necessarily be religious authors. Think about them and ask yourself, what kind of questions does it pull up in my mind? What does it make me think about? And then gather your people and talk.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. It's October 2024. What's one book you've read this year that's not necessarily a Christian book that has made an impact on you, John?
Oh. So I really like ghost stories and that kind of a thing. I know
did
this
not
is
see that
weird.
coming.
Yeah.
I do, and so
Plot twist.
I've read quite a bit of some ghost stories and things that are entertaining to me. But it makes me question, why do I think what I do? How does the world around me view things like the afterlife, or how does fear imply and change the culture around me? So I've got to read some pretty cool stuff. How about you?
Well, after I asked you that question, I thought, oh dear, he's going to turn this around, and I need to whip through my book list really quick in my head. I would say that a book that I really appreciated this year is by Judi Dench. She's a British actress, and it's called Shakespeare, The Man Who Pays the Rent, and it's her long, long career of acting roles in Shakespeare. And not only is it a really fun read because she is also a gifted storyteller, but it really showed me how much, she doesn't say this is my interpretation.
Okay.
She's had an absolute ball doing a job that she felt called to do and did well. And I was like, the Lord really is gracious and merciful in giving us things that we enjoy, that we can just spend our life doing, you know? I found an amazing homeschool community through the years, and I've read tons of great books with lots of wonderful people, and I didn't ask for that. He just graciously brought that into my life, And so when I was listening to her talk and just her memoirs and her fun things that she's done, I thought, this is an example of someone who has lived life to the full. And this is, again, not a Christian book. It's just, it's just a great story of someone who's done amazing things, but I would highly recommend it.
I feel like I should tell everybody that I work full time, and so my time
So do
between. Okay, now I feel bad. Now
I don't.
retract.
No, you're fine.
Now
Go
I
ahead.
retract.
Yeah.
My time between being a mom, being a wife, doing the studies that I do through Scripture, and then C.S. Lewis, my time is limited on other books that I read. Now I will read pretty much a Hallmark movie and a book. Those are my outside books right now.
When you need to just take your
It's
brain
just-
and quiet it
I
down for a
do,
little
yeah.
bit.
And
I
I
get
love
that.
to
Totally
read.
get that.
I'll tell you another book I read for the first time this year. I read Dune,
Oh, yeah.
and I loved it. I loved it.
You
Yeah.
did love it.
Yeah, I did.
Interesting. Yeah. Not a favorite, but I'm
I mean,
get there.
I don't think I'm going to name my children after anything in the book, but I enjoyed the book a lot. So, I mean, the world is filled with wonderful little treasures out there, whether it's a movie or a show or something. But my point is that I think we have grown so comfortable into just being a consumer of a product. Watch it, and I'm entertained, and I'm moving on. Talk about it. What did you like about it? Was it the way the cameras worked? Was it an idea in the book? Did some actor drive you crazy? And not just to be complainers, but to be conversationalists and to really engage with the wonders that are around us, I think is important.
So one thing that I've been able to do, real quick, Kristen, are you able to listen to things while you work, or do you have to stay completely focused on your job?
I'm completely focused.
So, okay.
Yeah, I don't really
Yeah.
I
have to
mean,
listen
they
to
don't
them.
need all their teeth.
Well,
I think they'd argue. I think they'd argue.
I was thinking
Just
how
sell them dentures.
whenever I go to the dentist and they clean my teeth, they'd cram a bunch of stuff in my mouth and then start talking to me and asking me questions, and I'd be like, "Please stop talking to me," So maybe they'd be more comfortable if you were listening to a story and not trying to make conversation.
I may
with
try
them.
that out.
Yeah, it might be.
Play a
Yeah,
book.
you get some. Yeah, but what I was going to say is that through our homeschooling community, that I have my daughter graduated from our homeschool, and her friends did too, and along about, I don't know, within a year or two, they said, we just don't read the same things we used to read. We don't have the same experiences we used to have. And I was like, hey, I'll read books with you. I have all my notes and all my things. And so I've been able to spend time with her and her friends who are now young adults, and we get to read together. And like this summer, we tackled Hamlet, and then we went and watched the play, you know. And right now, we're doing Frankenstein and ditto, go watch a play, and just things like that. And so it's like you find community in odd places. If you would have told me, 5 years ago with a teenage daughter at home that someday you'll be reading books together and it will be fun, I would have been like, yeah, right. Or if they said someday you'll be Lewising with two pastors and a podcasting friend, I'd be like, in what world, But
right.
so I'm just saying, like, just get yourself out there, choose a book, grab a friend. You never know where it's going to go. And I feel like we've said that. And I kind of wanted you to talk for just a minute about the Inklings. I know we're running close on an hour here, but in the spirit of what we're talking about, they did that.
Yeah, so the Inklings were a group of friends of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien who would meet together and talk. They would get beer at the Eagle and Child or the Lamb and Flag or the Trout down on the river, and they enjoyed reading what they were writing to each other. And they didn't all agree about anything. As a matter of fact, they really disliked some of each other's literature. But it was the kind of group that was built on friendship and shared interest. There was good conversation. And it wasn't about creating lots of little versions of yourself. It was about being enriched by each other's company. And I feel like as our churches and our communities grow increasingly more backed into corners. Everyone is so ready to fight. And very seldom do you get to just let your hair down and talk and say, hey, I was thinking about this, or I have some questions about this. And I would love to take that back. And I would love to encourage you to talk with people, not at people, but to people. Listen to the podcasts, ours or someone else's, and go out to eat. Let there be friendship. Let there be discussion. Let there be questions and answers. And you all sit there and say, that guy was crazy, and I'm never listening to John again. That's fine. But I want to try. And that's what the Two Trees is kind of about.
Yeah.
We're trying to have these discussions because Jesus is the God of gods, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, mighty and awesome.